So last 2 weeks I've tested this MatteBox a lot on both of my cameras. So I have covered all the lenses when you can screw on the reduction ring on, so the lenses with a thread, but the lens which I use the most is my 12mm Laowa, which does not have a thread. There is no way to screw in the reduction ring, so to be able to put MatteBox in front of this lens you need rods. So I got myself one of the cheapest baseplates. It's Smallrig. I would put the model name in the description down below. And it is quite tall baseplate, I'd say. There are smaller ones, although the rods are connected on top of a plate or higher than lower. But generally it seems to be some kind of the standard. There are different plates which allow you to move camera up and down, but they do not seem so stable. Anyway, I got this one. It was like 20-25 bucks, so quite cheap. So I got the rods. I got this original Tilta rod mount, which is included in the V&D kit. So I can put this here. And actually there are two ways to put it on the rods, that way or this way. But if I put this like that, then it interferes with the follow focus. So it's better to put it like that with the clamps facing down. So this is the lowest position I can mount it. And then I would put the MatteBox, and as you can see, it won't line up with the lens. There is a huge gap on top and the lens won't go into the ring. And even though there is a 82mm ring, if I remove this, and then I would like to line up this with the lens, but as you can see there is a big gap on top of it, but there is no clearance to put the lens inside because it's like 3mm too high, so there is no way to put it in. So the solution has been quite easy. So that's the original range of moves on the rod mount. So it's like maybe 1 centimeter, maybe 12mm, so half an inch. So you don't have that much flexibility here. So what's the solution? My friend just drilled me 2 additional holes, and they also threaded. The thread is M4 if you're interested. And that way, with 2 additional holes, my range of move is from here to actually here. So now with such setup we got like 3.5 centimeters of movement, so like 1.5 inch. And with these additional 2 holes I can then mount it back here, get 82mm reduction ring, put it inside, screw this in, then screw in the hood to the rods, and now I can try align this with the lens. And actually it seems it's better to have smaller gap on top of the lens than below, because if you got any light source shining from the back, it can reflect in the filter if you got filter in front of the lens. So the source would be rather on top of on the side of the lens, and even if it would be below the lens, it wouldn't shine through the head and through all the rig. So at the moment I got the MatteBox connected correctly, although there is a small gap as you can see. Yeah, but this is the way to connect the MatteBox in. Then you can screw this in and you're ready to go. Although since it is smaller than the diameter of the reduction, you have to be aware that you can scratch your filter on the metal elements of the lens, so you have to be careful when you put the filter in. Although as you can see there is still a small gap and you can see the light going through, so that could reflect in the filter if the light is going from the back, especially when the filter is set to higher density. I'm not sure I could demonstrate this, but when I checked this before, I've been able to get the reflection. It's definitely possible to get the reflection, although when it's pushed really in, it's quite hard to get the reflection, but it would be better to mask it totally. For the Basecamp Pro, I know there is some kind of the rubber hood to put between the lens and the MatteBox if the lens does not allow you to screw in the reduction plates. So that's the Pro for the Polar Pro setup, but maybe there is such thing for the Tilta, although it's not available in Poland for sure. I checked and they do not have such thing like that. So with the original rod mount, if your base plate is not tall enough, you won't be able to put MatteBox in front of your lens if you do not modify the round mount. So my friend modified it for me, and now I can mount it. But the small caveat is that the flak is bigger than the MatteBox itself, so as you can hear, it touches the rods, but you can close it to the end. So that's the way to mount it in front of the lens. On a base plate I got, but I checked and most of the base plates are more or less that height, although there are bigger base plates for bigger cameras. So you can find a base plate when you don't need a modification, when the base plate is high enough to accommodate the length of this mount. But you have to be aware that not every base plate is compatible with the setup straight from the box. So you need to make some modifications to the mount to be able to mount it correctly. And if you would like to use the MatteBox without any filter, I think you should put an empty frame inside, because as you can see, if there is no frame, you can still got some reflections into the lens if there is a light source above the lens. So I would recommend to put this empty frame, and when you do so, there is no way any light would get into the lens because it's blocking everything. So that's my recommendation, to actually put the frame in even if you do not use any filter. So now the MatteBox is connected with Laowa 12mm, and I would like to check the cross pattern on wide angle lens. This is 12mm, so in full frame terms it is around 18. It's probably closer to 20 because this Laowa seems not to be really 12mm. It is more narrow than any other 12 I compared it to, but it is quite wide anyway. So the setup is simple. Unfortunately, I do not have two lights, so I'm using my only light to lit up the wall. It is on full power, and then I got the lens set up as f8, and I can see on the parade that I'm more or less in the middle of the range. I would monitor the parade, and every time I stop either the lens by one stop or move the ISO one stop, then I can adjust the filter and more or less know how many stops I'm in. So at the moment there is no filter, so I'm 0 stops in and I'm in the middle of the parade. Now I'm dropping the filter, set up at 1. So this is at the minimum, which means it is 1 stop, and the parade dropped. So to compensate, I would switch by 1 stop, but I had to move 2 stops, so maybe it's starting from 2 stops. I don't know how accurate is the scale on the lens, but I had to move 2 stops on the lens to be back here. I can move another stop and adjust the filter accordingly. So now we are 3 stops in, and then I can adjust it via ISO to compensate, because now the lens is wide open, and I think we should check it wide open against the cross pattern, because then the iris is bigger when it's wide open. So I guess the more of the front element is used when the iris is wider. So now I'm just moving 1 stop via ISO and would compensate with the filter, and now we are 4 stops in and there is no cross pattern. The only thing, there is some shadow. That was the flag actually. So 4 stops in, I can't see the cross pattern. Maybe there is something here and here. It's easier to see when the LUT is turned on actually. Hard to say. It is that the corners are darker, but they might be darker because the lens is wide open, so there is some vignetting from the lens. Anyway, without the LUT it doesn't seem to have a cross pattern. 4 stops in, so another stop, and then I have to compensate with the ND filter. So we are 5 stops in, and to be honest, maybe there is a small thing on a monitor here. but if this is the case, this is really small. So now going 6 stops in, and I'd say the parade, yeah, I think there is something already, although there are some reflections, but like 6 stops in, there is I think a small difference, and it's especially visible when the LUT is on. So it's already like this area is darker and this area is darker. So maybe I would come back to 5 stops. So this 5 steps in, I came back to 5 steps, and with LUT I think the cross pattern is already here. It seems so. So 5 steps in, the cross pattern is here, and with 4 steps it rather seems like vignetting, but it's quite hard to judge on this monitor. Anyway, for sure 5 stops in there is something. 6 stops in definitely when the LUT is on. It's not that visible when I'm using log, but with LUT on it's definitely in. And let's try 7 stops. I'd say there is something definitely at the moment, both here and here. Plus there are some reflections. The reflections are probably created via the slit between the MatteBox and the lens, but it's hard to say. Maybe something else is reflecting. It seems like it's actually reflecting what's on the desk behind it, so definitely via the slit here, and it reflects in the filter. Anyway, definitely there is a cross pattern now, and really pronounced. So I can go one more step. Now it's even visible on the log when we are 8 steps in, and I think I'm reflecting in the filter now. So the slit is really small. It's like 1 or 2 millimeters, but you can see that something is reflecting, and this is the desk which is behind the camera, so it's not the best solution to have MatteBox mounted like that. When I remove the filter, there won't be a problem because there is nothing reflecting in front of the lens, but at the moment you can see that there is a reflection of stuff behind it. But I'd say that with 18 millimeters you can use these 1 to 5 steps, and then you can see the cross pattern. But actually my guess is you can remove this cross pattern in post, but might be the case that you lose some details from the footage due to the different density of the filter, so you might not be able to recover everything. But at least in DaVinci with the power window you could just map these areas and feather them down, and then you can track them and change the exposure there. So it shouldn't be a problem to get the same exposure on the whole image, but then it might be the case that you lose some details because the filter is more dense in this area. So, but for sure 1 to 4 stops you can use it. There is no cross pattern. 5, it's hard to guess, seems to be still okay, and 6 and above with 18 millimeters you got a cross pattern. So this is the reality of the included VND here. Okay, and now I moved the MatteBox to the maximum position towards the lens, so I pushed back the MatteBox till almost lens touches the ND filter. I'm not sure I can remove it now because there is a... Yes, I can remove it, but it touches the lens with the frame when I remove it. But I wanted to check if I close the gap here, there is a still gap between the lens and the 82 millimeters ring, reduction ring, but since the lens is pushed inside the hood and inside the ring, it seems that reflection is gone. So in this setup, when you got the original ND, you probably can get rid of the reflection when you push the lens inside, at least this lens with 82 millimeters reduction plate, so you can avoid those reflection from the lights and from the stuff behind the lens in the filter if it is pushed inside. That's the good news actually. And one more thing regarding the MatteBox on 12 millimeters. The flag does not cover the whole area on top of the lens, so if sun shines from this side or this side, this would get into the lens anyway, because the flag is too narrow to cover the whole field of view of such wide lens. So it probably won't protect from the sun, and I will check it in a second with my headlight. You can see the flare, even though the source light is above the lens, but the flak is too narrow to protect this, so this is diagonally above the lens, so you cannot see the flare now, but when I move the paper, the flare is there. So that means that the flak is too narrow to cover the whole field of view from above. That's the small cone. And from the side, when you are like from the side, when you're like 15 degrees in, then you can see the flare. So it does not protect that good from the side when the lens is really wide. So this is 12 millimeters. On the Blackmagic it is around 18, and the field of view is so big that when I put my hand here at a degree of around 30 degrees, then you can see my hand in the frame already. So, but when I keep my hand there is a protection against the flare, and when I remove the hand, then you can see the flare. But what is positively surprising that there is almost no loss of contrast when I put maybe a bit, it depends on the angle, but I'm positively surprised how good this Laowa actually is against the direct source of light regarding the loss of contrast, because on the Samyang it is just terrible. So at least this is the pro, but it's rather pro of the lens, not of the MatteBox. But the MatteBox does not protect very well from the side flare. From above, especially diagonally, it won't protect you because the flak is too narrow for such a wide lens. So that's the, I say that's the it depends, might be a big cone, might be a small cone, might be not a cone at all if you like flares. I don't actually, but it depends. So as proven before, included ND filter does not have a cross pattern up to 5 stops with such a wide lens. So it is actually 1 to 5, maybe 1 to 6, but it is supposed to be 1 to 9, although they claim it is 1 to 7 for the wide lenses below 35 millimeters. But it seems not to be case. It seems not to be the case. It's rather 5 or maybe 6 stops when you still got a clean image and you do not have a X pattern. But actually there is a solution for this, but you need another filter. I still got my Peter McKinnon 6 to 9 stops ND, and actually it is 82 millimeters filter. I got 82, the biggest one, to be able to adapt to any of my lenses. And here I got the 82 millimeters ring. But if you want to mount the screw-in filter, you have to move the MatteBox forward a bit, because then the lens hood, which is part of the lens, actually would hit it. And also there is no way to screw this in with the cap on, and without the cap I tried before, and it's really hard to screw it in, and you touch the filter with your fingers. So I think it's not possible because it's so much inside. That means that to install the screw-in filter you have to take more steps. So you have to remove actually the reduction plate, screw in the filter, and you have to remove the protective hood, the rubber one, and you have to screw in the filter. And when it is in, you have to install it in the MatteBox without touching it. It's not that easy, although possible with a bit of training. And then you have to move it as far as possible towards the lens, not to touch the filter, to not to scratch it. But since there is a still gap, between the reduction ring and the lens, at least in case of this lens, then you have to push it as deep as possible to get rid of any reflections from behind. And then it's not that easy to turn that filter. Maybe you can do it from the front, but actually I can do it with a screwdriver, just pushing the ridges of the filter. This filter does not create any cross pattern with Laowa 12, so you got an options, but this filter is quite expensive. Although I've seen the reviews that the actual filter from the base camp is creating cross pattern, so they got two separate filters, 2 to 5 and 6 to 9, but someone claimed in the review that with wide lenses there is a still cross pattern. So might be the case that base camp isn't any better than VND filter included with Tilta Mirage. So actually with the clamp modification, you can put both MatteBox onto the such lens, and you can also screw in another filter and be able to use it without a cross pattern if you need more stops than 5. That's the solution, although it's not a nice solution, because the Peter McKinnon filter, or probably any other filter you can screw in, is around $200. I must say that circular filter removal from the MatteBox has been quite an adventure. Maybe I found a way just to put the hand below it and unscrew it, and it drops to your hand. So yeah, that's the way, because if this is mounted on the camera, it's actually almost not possible to remove the filter without touching it or dropping it. So but on top of your palm you can both screw it in and remove it. So that's the way. And now I'm recording on Samyang 12mm, the manual one. I use this quite often when I'm recording the basketball games. This is my second angle camera with that lens. As you can see, the image is not that contrasty, and especially if I open the lens wide, if the lens is wide open, but when I put my hand to cover the light source, then it is more contrasty. When there is no cover, it's really bad and wash out. At least the oldest Samyangs suffer like this. My 24mm is exactly the same. It just loses contrast when there is a light source bouncing from the front element. And if I move this, then you can see that the picture becomes more contrasty and less washed out when the light source is removed from the frame, from the field of view. At the moment I put the MatteBox on, and there is no loss of contrast, but then I remove it, you can see there is a difference. But then when I turn the MatteBox in, you can see that whenever the light source is visible in the frame, you are losing the contrast. So when I put my hand against this light, the contrast is still retained. So at the moment the position is that there is no visible light in the frame, but since the light is quite big and is shining from the side, there is still loss of contrast. But when I put a piece of paper, I can actually flag it, and you do not lose that contrast. There is no flare from the side, but you do not see the paper actually. So there would be a way to have a side flag to mitigate this problem, especially with those Sony E-mount Samyang. There is a problem with this loss of contrast when there is a light source to the side. So I got my trusty headlamp, and you can see that the flaring with this Samyang is quite terrible, and especially the loss of contrast here, it's just really bad. As you can see, the light source is not in the frame, but actually I'm able to remove it with a side flag. I'm creating the side flag with this, so hard to say how big the side flag should be to eliminate this, but at least the side flag is not in the frame, and I can mitigate the problem with this reflection in the front element. So the side flag would be quite nice. Yeah, and what about the reflection from the top? The flag is down, and when I put it up, you can see that image, because the image becomes washed out. When I put the flag down, it is much better. But if I'm shining from above but to the side, it is exactly the same story as with the Laowa on Blackmagic 6K, that the flag is not able to protect it, but I can remove this with my hand when protecting the lens from this light source. So the flag is actually too narrow to protect wide angle lenses from this diagonal light source. So even when the light source is above the lens but to the side also, then the flag does not protect it. So that's the big con, I'd say, of this setup. So probably Basecamp would be better in that regard because it got wider flag, so it would protect the wide lenses a bit more. Although it's hard to say how good it is because I don't have a Basecamp at the moment. But the wider the top flag, the better protection from light sources which are above but also to the side. But actually it would be nice also to have side flags on this. So I hope there would be an accessory which allows to connect the side flags, because with some lenses you can see it is really annoying to have anything shining into the lens, but you can to the degree eliminate the problem with side or wider top flag. That's how it is with some of the lenses. And also when you record in log, you might not see the difference when you put the hood on and off, but when you color grade the footage, you would be surprised what the difference is when the hood is on, because then the footage becomes more contrasty. And of course it depends. If you are going to have a artistic effect of the washed out image because there is a sun shining into the lens, then you have to remove it, the flag. But if you want the crispiest image and you want the scene to be and if you want the scene to be still contrasty, then you should put the flag on. But you have to keep in mind that if the source is above but to the side also, this setup won't protect you against any visual bad effects if the lens is quite wide. So last 2 weeks I've tested this MatteBox a lot on both of my cameras, and I guess there is not much to cover. Maybe some additional accessories for the MatteBox, but I do not have them, and most of them are not available in Poland, so I'm not able to test them, at least at the moment. There are additional frames for circular filters. There are additional frames for rectangular filters, but I do not have a rectangular filter at all, so I'm not able to test it. But it might be quite interesting to have a circular one, to be able to put mist and ND at the same time, and the circular filters are much lighter, so that solution might be quite nice to use on a small camera rig, either the Sony APS-C, Sony full frame, or my Blackmagic 6K. So I guess there is not much more to cover regarding this MatteBox. So I guess after watching my 2 videos you can take an informed decision if it is worth to get it or not. I'd say it's worth to get it, but it also depends what are your scenarios of shooting videos, and it also depends what kind of lens do you got. If those are big cinematic lenses, it might not even fit, and might be the case that for some lenses you think you would get a good flare or loss of contrast protection, but since the MatteBox is quite small, you might be mistaken. If you got any requests for the test, let me know in the comments, and maybe I will be able to test it against some other lenses or other setups. Cheers, mate.